For more than 50 years, a single brand showed every kid in the States how to balance on two wheels. Step into any random American driveway or garage, and you're bound to spot one. It is a Huffy, specifically that Thunder Road model every 70s child dreamed of owning. Remember the Sigma's plastic rims that rattled like drums at high speeds, or those dragsters styled exactly like mini chopper motorcycles? These weren't high end luxury rides, they were the wheels regular families could actually buy. Huffman actually came up with training wheels, completely transforming how little kids first experienced life on a bike. That Huffy convertible used four wheels so toddlers could learn without eating pavement. By the 1960s, the brand was crafting the iconic rides of the era. They featured those long banana seats and tall handlebars that gave off a real outlaw biker vibe. Some even had battery operated radios built right into the metal. Having one definitely made you the envy of the entire neighborhood. During its glory days, the Huffman factory in Celina was pumping out over 2 million bikes every single year. With a staff of over 1,000, it was the biggest game in town, but Huffy was building something bigger than just hardware. They were creating childhood memories for millions. However, by the mid 90s, cheap imports from China started saturating the market at half the price. Major retailers like Walmart, their primary buyer, forced them to lower prices. Honestly, they just couldn't outcompete overseas plants paying staff only 25 cents an hour. Even though Celina staff took a 20% pay cut in 1995 to survive, they only lasted another 3 years. Come July 1998, the doors locked for good, leaving all 1,000 workers without a paycheck. By the time 2004 rolled around, Chinese investors had completely taken over what was left of the company. The brand that raised American kids simply couldn't survive against foreign labor paid pennies. Part 1, Moving from Needles to Wheels. Back in 1887, George Huffman took ownership of the Davis sewing machine firm. Only 25, he was already a powerhouse in Dayton, Ohio, leading both a major milling operation and a development firm, holding a top executive role at Crew and Septon Manufacturing. While also managing finances for a bank and a hydraulic company, George clearly wasn't one to sit around. 3 years into owning the sewing business, he relocated the entire plant from New York down to his home base in Dayton. Sewing gear paid the bills, but George noticed a massive shift in American culture. Everyone was suddenly obsessed with buying bicycles. In 1892, his factory rolled out its debut bike, appropriately named the Dayton. It was a basic steel ride with wooden wheels, and it flew off shelves. By 1897, they were the nation's top bike manufacturer. They weren't just winning in sewing machines anymore, they were the absolute kings of the bicycle world. The transition was a massive success, though George never saw the full impact. Kidney failure took him on New Year's Eve, 1897. He passed at just 35. His young son Horace was far too little to grasp the empire his father had started. For the next quarter century, the business continued churning out bikes using that original Dayton branding. By the 1920s, cycling was a national pastime. Over 600,000 units were sold in 1922 alone as the market exploded. However, the original Huffman family no longer owned the Davis Company. It had already been auctioned off. Now grown Horace wanted to reclaim his legacy. In late 1924, he and his cousin John launched the Huffman Manufacturing Company. They started a new plant with 100 employees focused on building premium, high-end bikes. Fresh designs like the Flyer, the Fleetwood, and the radio models quickly hit the retail market. They ignored the budget market entirely, focusing all their energy on superior craftsmanship. Located in Dayton's industrial heart, the plant did more than just build bikes. Horace spotted a huge opening in the booming car market. They actually designed a specialized nozzle for pouring engine oil out of huge 50-gallon barrels. Service stations across the country were desperate for gear, and Huffman filled that void. Variety kept them afloat, which was lucky because the Great Depression soon arrived. By 1933, production dropped to 20 units daily. That was all. While other businesses collapsed entirely, Huffman managed to stay alive by shifting gears. Cars were too pricey during the economic crash, making bikes the primary way for people to get around. By 1939, they were back up to 600 daily units, ranking as the nation's fourth biggest manufacturer. In a strange twist, the economic downfall actually rescued the bike industry. Part 2, the global conflict that reshaped the world. After 1941, every American shop faced a difficult choice. They could stick to consumer goods or support the troops. Huffman decided to tackle both missions simultaneously. Uncle Sam was hunting for rugged featherweight bikes for his soldiers. Tough sets of wheels were essential gear. Just a pair of American firms got the green light to keep making cycles while the war raged, and Huffman was one. Over 4,000 combat-ready cycles rolled out of their shop. 50% of the bikes our troops rode originated from Huffman's Dayton plant, all bare-bones models. No bells or whistles here, just a sturdy frame, pedals, brakes, and a couple of tires engineered for pure endurance. Yet, the factory turned out more than just two-wheelers. Huffman also dedicated its assembly lines to crafting ignition caps for heavy artillery rounds. This industrial pivot was massive. Revenue skyrocketed from $1.5 million in 1940 to $2.8 million just 2 years later. Their workforce ballooned from 385 pre-war staff to nearly 1,000 employees by 1945. Once peace returned, the market for bikes went through the roof. Vets returned, households expanded, and the suburban sprawl began alongside the baby boom. Every child wanted a ride, and Huffman was poised to deliver. On May 13, 1947, a milestone was reached at their Celina, Ohio facility. Their 1 millionth cycle finally exited the production floor. Staff coated the entire chassis in 14-karat gold. It hit the conveyor at 5 o'clock and was completely assembled a mere 7 minutes later. 700 employees were cranking out 1,500 units daily back then. That gilded frame was gifted to Henry Ford II for exhibition at his museum in Dearborn, Michigan. These days, the piece is being showcased by Dayton History over at Carillon Park. A couple years down the road, Huffman pioneered an innovation that would redefine the American kid's experience for generations. Prior to 1949, learning to balance was a painful ritual. You hopped on Bit the Dust and repeated the cycle until it clicked. You either mastered the balance or threw in the towel. There wasn't a middle ground. Then Huffman Manufacturing disrupted the whole process. They modified a kid's bike by securing a pair of tiny stabilizer wheels directly onto the rear axle. This transformed the two-wheeler into a four-wheeled vehicle. Little ones could pedal away without tipping over during practice. Once they gained confidence, those extra wheels just popped right off. It was an elegant stroke of genius marketed as the Huffy convertible. Initially, those side components were known as removable outriggers. The training wheels moniker didn't actually catch on until some time had passed. This model was the world's first large-scale production bike built just for beginners. In under 5 years, practically every youth bicycle in the country adopted them. After shaking up the entire cycling world, the firm opted to make a major branding move. Those 1949 trainer-equipped models were also the debut products to carry the Huffy label, replacing the old Dayton nameplate. By 1953, the company had fully transitioned its lineup to the Huffy banner. The 61-year-old Dayton legacy was officially put to rest. Huffy became the new standard. Chapter 3, the cycles that shaped our early years. In 1955, Huffman debuted a radical concept. Instead of a clip-on accessory, this bike featured a genuine battery-operated tube radio built right into the frame's tank section. Cruising around while jamming to the latest hits was finally a reality. Dubbed the radio bike, only 8,500 units were ever manufactured. They didn't come cheap either. Though high maintenance, they were the pinnacle of cool. Nowadays, a well-preserved Huffy radio bike can fetch between $1,500 and $2,000. This fusion of travel and tunes eventually turned into a highly sought-after prize for collectors. By 1960, the Huffman Company had climbed the ranks to become the nation's third biggest bike producer. Their Celina plant supported 650 staff members, churning out hundreds of thousands of units annually. Top sellers featured the training wheel-equipped convertible, along with the La France the Racer, the Special Roadster, and the sleek Streamliner. Huffy was a household name. Then in 1962, an individual by the name of Peter Mole pitched a fresh concept to the leadership. Representing John T. Bill and Company, Mole brought insights from the field. He'd been observing the youth culture in Southern California where kids were hacking vintage bikes. They were installing elongated banana seats to fit a couple of riders. They added towering handlebars reminiscent of chopper bikes paired with tiny front tires and oversized rears. These custom rides looked insane and were a hit with the kids. Mole urged Huffman to manufacture the design, which he labeled the High Rise. It boasted an extended banana seat held up by Strut's massive ape hanger bars and 20-inch rims. This was a total departure for the company. Huffman felt unsure, as it seemed less like a standard cycle and more like a motorcycle-themed toy. Was there a market for it? Would moms and dads actually open their wallets? Following months of debate, Huffman gave the green light, but with a catch if it flopped. Peter Mole was personally responsible for purchasing the remaining inventory. By March 1963, the bike arrived on retail shelves under the name Penguin. It was the nation's very first mass-marketed banana seat chopper. It was an instant success. Children were obsessed, and the Penguin quickly transformed into a major cultural trend. Come November 1964, Huffman took out a massive full-page ad in Life magazine to promote their latest creation, the Dragster. Marketing materials asserted that Huffman pioneered the production of high-rise style bikes. While Schwinn worked on their Stingray model, Huffman actually hit the shelves first by releasing the Penguin. That Dragster model solidified Huffy's image as the brand creating the cycles every child craved. During 1966, Huffman launched the Rail, featuring a chassis stretched 4 to 5 inches beyond earlier versions. This elongated frame served as Huffman's standard for 2 years before they pushed boundaries again in 1968. Swapping bars for a steering wheel and mounting high-rise shifters on the frame, they mimicked the feel of classic muscle cars. Dubbed the Huffy wheel, the design seemed totally ridiculous, yet absolutely genius. Youth went wild for it, and that season, Huffman also debuted the Flaming Stack Guard, echoing Corvette exhaust pipes. Bicycles evolved past mere travel tools into symbols of personal flair and shared identity. These rides defined coolness, leading Huffman to grow their Celina facility to 610,000 square feet with 650 staff. Manufacturing lines ran at maximum speed just to keep up with the overwhelming demand. Iconic 1970s memories were built on bikes like the Thunder Road, whose racing plates and banana seats sparked imaginations. Growing up stateside back then meant either owning a Huffy Thunder Road or having a best friend who did. However, the landscape shifted entirely come 1971. Strict production and safety mandates arrived from the Consumer Product Safety Commission alongside various other government regulatory bodies. Those new laws stifled Huffman's most imaginative concepts, effectively forcing the iconic Huffy wheel off the assembly lines. Frame-mounted shifters were prohibited and high handlebars outlawed, stripping Huffy models of the unique touches that made them famous. Huffman pivoted by focusing on low-cost cycles for families since their eccentric custom designs were no longer a viable option. That became their primary mission moving forward. Section 4. Reaching the summit, Huffman Manufacturing transformed into a massive cycling powerhouse throughout the 1970s. Pumping out over 2 million units annually, the Celina site led global production outside Asia with 1,000-plus daily employees. In a community of 12,000, that plant was the heartbeat, employing 1 out of every 12 local residents. Their manufacturing footprint stretched across several locations nationwide. Beyond their Celina hub, operations expanded to Ohio, Oklahoma, and California as Huffman began diversifying well past two-wheeled transportation. Back in 1949, they entered the lawn care market with various mowers while also branching into sports equipment. Producing official professional basketball hoops, they soon ventured further into childcare goods and inventory management solutions. A 1970 reorganization turned Huffman Manufacturing into a parent entity known officially as Huffy Corporation. Their bike unit took the name Huffy Bicycle Company, whereas the sports branch operated under the Huffman Manufacturing label. The transition finalized in 1977 when the whole organization unified under the Huffy Corporation brand. With the change finished, the Smithsonian accepted Huffy's 30 millionth bike into their collection in 1979. Nearing the Fortune 500 ranks, they saw their stock listed on the big board using the ticker symbol HUF. Success was evident everywhere, especially within their incredibly streamlined and high-performing production center. Specialized laborers manned automated lines that whisked bicycles through the entire manufacturing process in mere moments. From welding frames to checking brakes, every step followed the blueprint established by Horace Huff Huffman Jr. Those 1940s linear assembly methods remained the engine behind their massive output many generations later. Pouring $15 million into robotics during the early 80s, Huffy committed deeply to modernizing their workflow. These improvements boosted daily output by 5,000 units and trimmed manufacturing overhead by 14%. On a global scale, the Celina facility stood out as a premier center for high-tech cycle manufacturing. Growth continued outside Celina when Huffy acquired a California cycle firm in 1970, repurposing it for nationwide service. This branch handled assembly for major retail giants such as Walmart, Target, Sears, and Kmart. Acquisitions included a Denver-based baby goods company, alongside gardening brands in Pennsylvania, Washington State, bike manufacturers and inventory specialists headquartered in San Diego. As Huffy expanded, the Celina workforce enjoyed solid pay, reliable healthcare, and the security of a pension. One could spend 30 years with Huffman and comfortably retire on their earned benefits, confident that the next generation would find work there too. That site anchored the town's entire economy. Stateside industry was hitting its absolute stride here. Starting back in 1887, this business survived global conflicts and economic crashes to eventually pump out millions of units annually while hiring thousands of folks. Huffy served as the living embodiment of domestic industrial success. Yet despite all that glory, one nagging issue remained beyond their reach. Section 5, the big box retailer cycle. As the Huffman manufacturing outfit cranked out millions of two-wheelers over in Celina, those frames weren't destined for local boutiques. Instead, they headed for Kmart, Toys R Us, Sears, Montgomery Ward, and various bargain chains or massive department stores. Every youngster in the country understood the deal. Picture yourself wandering into a shop with your folks back in 1975. 2 tiers of wheels sat on display. The budget models, brands like Huffy Murray or Columbia, ran between $70 and $90. If the place was fancy enough, you'd spot the high-end gear from Schwinn or Mongoose, priced north of $200. Mom and dad would scan those stickers and immediately gesture toward the Huffy. That scenario played out for millions of families. The ride you craved stayed at the store. You went home with whatever fit the budget. By Monday's first bell, the whole school was aware. Those peers on Mongooses or GTs wouldn't let you forget it. You were on a clunky discount rack heavyweight. But there's a catch. You actually owned wheels, which translated to pure independence. It meant pedaling to a buddy's place, sprinting down the asphalt, or constructing dirt jumps behind the house. A Huffy might not have been top tier, but it belonged to you. For the majority of us, that was plenty. These machines were actually pretty sturdy. You had the Thunder sporting its banana seat and a cool race plate, plus the blue and gold Pro Thunder. Then came the 1980s and the iconic Sigma, the one ride nobody forgets. Its plastic disc covers created this distinct echoing rhythm while you rode. A Sigma's approach was audible from a full street over. Weighing in at 33 pounds, it was a total beast, yet it looked awesome. It featured a shiny chrome frame, unique shields, and aggressive decals. For $89, you scored a look that seemed far pricier. Naturally, the neighborhood kids followed their usual instincts. They personalized their rides completely. We'd peel off the logos, respray the metal slap-on stickers, trade components with neighbors, install axle pegs for stunts, or swap out bars and saddles. Nobody left a Huffy in factory condition. You'd tweak the thing until its original brand was basically unrecognizable. People even slapped together Frankenstein bikes using scavenged bits, maybe a Huffy base with mongoose bars, GT pedals, and Skyway rims, basically anything they could barter for or salvage. That Huffy served as the core building block. It was inexpensive enough that a break wouldn't ruin your life, yet tough enough to survive sketchy jumps and sidewalk collisions. Through all that tinkering, we basically became amateur mechanics. We learned to mend chains, straighten rims, dial in brakes, and swap rubber. That Huffy functioned as a hands-on classroom. Not due to any complexity, but because the design was straightforward enough to master. When parts inevitably snapped, you handled the repair solo since professional shops weren't on the table. Still, that budget reputation stuck like glue. The BMX world was full of trash talk, including stickers claiming they'd sooner walk than be seen on a Huffy. Another joke went, if Huffy ever built a plane, would you actually board it? The point was painfully obvious. They were seen as the bargain bin entry point, something you moved away from, never toward. The brand fought hard to change that narrative. During the mid-'80s, they took a huge gamble by recruiting Stu Thompson, a legend in the dirt racing scene who had previously repped the Elite Redline brand. Huffy brought him on board to both compete and help engineer their fleet. The hope was that if Stu Thompson endorsed them, the youth would follow suit. They put together a powerhouse squad featuring Stu Thompson, Gary Ellis, and Mike King. They even tapped Brian Blither for the freestyle circuit. Management poured cash into superior parts, tougher frames, and sharper ads. A new emblem appeared on the frames, declaring that Huffy was dead serious about the BMX world. This wasn't some empty hype. The quality actually improved. That Stu Thompson Pro model was packed with legit gear. Youngsters who were priced out of a mongoose could finally own a ride built by a pro. For a short window, the strategy paid off. The brand gained some real street cred, but the executives eventually retreated. Maintaining that team cost a fortune with little profit to show for it. Within just a few seasons, the roster vanished. The company returned to its bread and butter, mass-producing affordable wheels for discount aisles. They made a play for the elite road racing scene as well. Back in the early 80s, they backed Team 7-Eleven during their European campaigns and the Tour de France. However, those frames weren't genuine Huffies. A boutique builder called Serrata custom-made the cycles, which were then stickered with Huffy branding. The athletes pocketed the sponsorship money. It gave the brand some exposure, though the pros knew the score. They repeated this tactic for the Olympic Games. During the 1984 and 88 Games, American stars pedaled Huffy-labeled bikes to 2 golds, 2 silvers, and a bronze. Those machines were actually Serrata builds. Huffy basically bought the name rights. Even legendary U.S. rider Greg LeMond repped Huffy under the Team 7-Eleven banner. It was purely a cash deal since he raced on totally different frames. He was riding third-party gear. Fast forward to the late 90s, and Huffy made another play by building a real-deal freestyle and BMX squad. Names like Todd Lyons, Aaron Bainey, Jimmy Levan, and Ruben Alcantara signed on. This wasn't some cheap PR stunt. We're talking about absolute icons of the scene. Meanwhile, Huffy started dropping premium-tier cycles. Models like the Primus Enigma and Delirium featured Shimano DX hardware and profile cranks on solid frames ready for the track immediately. Enthusiasts hunt for those vintage rides now, yet Huffy faced a massive financial drain as the 90s closed due to a wave of overseas imports. Battling Walmart on pricing became brutal, and keeping that BMX division afloat cost a fortune. Big box retail sales drove the numbers, so Huffy had to ditch their quest for street cred just to stay in business. Those pro models vanished, the riders split up, and this cycle continued for several 10-year stretches. They'd dive into the BMX world with grand visions and top tier talent, only to pull the plug shortly after. Always a revolving door, long term investment failed because the big bucks lived in moving budget friendly units through Walmart or Kmart. Moving massive quantities was the only way the assembly lines stayed active. Here is the cold, hard truth. Huffy stayed stuck in that niche. While one lucky kid scored a Mongoose 10, others started out on a Huffy and mastered the basics. Those kids took spills, handled their own repairs, and cruised through the neighborhood from the final bell until dark. They constructed makeshift jumps and shredded their rubber thin, eventually buying a pro setup with clear goals, thanks to their Huffy beginnings. A retail shelf bicycle served as the entry point rather than the ultimate goal. For half a century, though, it put millions of children in the saddle, and as long as Huffy turned a profit, nothing else mattered. Brand reputation wasn't a concern while the machines hummed and the staff kept their paychecks. Eventually, however, public image became a critical issue. Once overseas factories churned out clones at 50% of the cost, big retailers stopped valuing the Huffy brand altogether. Cost dictated everything, and Huffy's long history of providing low-cost rides to U.S. households couldn't shield them from ruin. Chapter 6, The Overseas Surge. Harry A. Shaw III stepped in as Huffy Corporation's chief executive in 1982. They were riding high on 5 consecutive years of peak profits with blueprints ready for a new Oklahoma-based factory in Panca City. On the surface, things were great, yet Shaw noticed red flags as manufacturing expenses began to climb. The market was getting crowded, and companies were merging, prompting Shaw to pull a very controversial move. Massive layoffs and factory closures followed as he axed the California-based ISUSA site along with the Oklahoma operation. Manufacturing shifted entirely to the Celina location. After liquidating the car parts branch, he funneled that capital into high-tech robotic systems. This game plan actually paid off for a brief period, spending $15 million on automated tech, boosted their output, and lowered overhead, making Huffy a tight ship, though the true threat lurked outside. Danger was approaching from across the ocean. In the middle of the 90s, overseas builders saturated the US with low-cost units that mimicked Huffy's designs for half the sticker price. It boiled down to wages. Workers in those foreign plants made between 25 and 41 cents an hour. Domestic staff in Celina earned $15 hourly, while Huffy spent $80 building a bike in Ohio. International competitors did it for $40 initially. Huffy teamed up with other US-based brands like Roadmaster and Murray Inc. to push back. They launched legal protests claiming this tidal wave of budget imports would cripple the domestic cycling industry. By 1996, the federal court sided with the importers, ruling that the influx wasn't a substantial danger to local business. With the gates wide open, imports surged. By 1997, 60% of all bikes bought in America were foreign-made. Domestic bike making was on life support, and Huffy found themselves completely powerless to stop the decline. Yet cheap overseas products were just one piece of the puzzle. Retail was shrinking as well. By the mid-90s, 75% of the market was dominated by giants like Target, Kmart, and Walmart. Mom-and-pop cycling shops faded away, leaving the mega retailers with total control over those who built the bikes. These stores set the price tags and the rules. If a brand balked, the retailers simply replaced them. Walmart emerged as Huffy's primary buyer and issued a single ultimatum: either drop prices to match the imports or get dropped. Huffy was backed into a corner. They couldn't match foreign wages, yet losing their biggest account would mean instant failure. Walmart was more than just a buyer. They were the buyer. Dropping them meant the whole brand would collapse. Consequently, Huffy slashed every expense possible. They switched a large chunk of the assembly to robotics. They reworked vendor deals and tightened up workflows. Nothing mattered. The figures just wouldn't balance out. You couldn't pay Americans $15 an hour and compete with shops paying 25 cents. By 1995, Huffy was failing. The firm reported $10.5 million in red ink. Change was mandatory, so they targeted the staff. Part 7, The Compromise. Come April 1995, Huffy Brass pitched a deal to the Celina labor group. The business was bleeding. Cheap Chinese goods were killing them, and Walmart wanted deeper discounts. Without concessions, they'd move everything to their Missouri shop. Livelihoods were at risk. The bosses had a plan: slashed pay by 20%. Checks would shrink now, but Celina stays open. Otherwise, everyone is on the street. The crew took the 20% hit just to keep their checks coming and the local plant running. It was a brutal choice. Households tightened belts, and folks worked double shifts, certain they were keeping the site alive. They had faith the brand would make it. For 2 years it did. Huffy actually turned a profit again. Those pay drops lowered overhead enough to stay in the game. The Celina team did exactly what they were told. They rescued the shop, but the win was fleeting. Walmart never stopped grinding them for even lower wholesale rates. Overseas builders kept lowballing the whole market. By 1997, Huffy was failing. That 20% cut wasn't enough. Come April 1998, the labor reps met the bosses with a few demands of their own. It had been 3 years since the pay slash, the staff kept their word, and the firm was earning again. Payback time had arrived. The union requested a 20% hike to restore original earnings plus extra cash for 3 years of lost income and perks. Both sides met. Huffy's counteroffer was way below what the employees were looking to get. Labor stood firm and the meetings hit a wall. Nobody moved. Then in July 1998, Huffy dropped a bombshell. The Celina site was shutting down. 1,000 people were getting fired. There was no room for any debate. The staff was blindsided. They'd sacrificed 20% of their checks for the plant and followed every single corporate order. Now, 3 years later, they were getting dumped regardless. All that struggle had been for absolutely nothing at all. That Celina factory was churning out 1.66 million bikes every year before the lights went out. It ran perfectly, but China's cheap labor was too much. Huffy simply couldn't justify the overhead cost any longer. Closing those doors killed 1,000 jobs a quarter of the company. Only a few lucky souls were moved to Missouri. Everyone else was just unemployed. The reorganization cost Huffy $16 to $20 million to shutter Celina. They wanted to downsize operations and move their manufacturing into facilities with significantly lower overhead costs. The plan was to ramp up output at the Missouri facility. They also grabbed a 100,000 square foot warehouse for components while shipping in Asian units, but Missouri didn't survive very long. Right after Celina folded, the Farmington site went dark too. Then the Mississippi plant was the next to go. Before 1998 wrapped up, Huffy had pulled the plug on every single bike factory they owned in America. Work hopped from China to Mexico and back again. Even with global labor, Huffy couldn't stay profitable at the prices Walmart insisted on. The brand that gave us training wheels was no match for shops paying 25 cents an hour to their laborers. For Celina, the closure was totally devastating. That shop had been the local breadwinner for ages, employing generations of families. Losing it wasn't just about the missing paychecks. It ripped the financial heart right out of the town. Part 8, the final curtain. Following the 1998 Celina closure, Huffy bet that outsourcing would be their salvation. They were wrong. Despite the cheap Chinese workers, Huffy couldn't hit the margins Walmart required. The brand stayed deep in the red. By 2004, Huffy had lost money 3 years straight. Debt was piling up dangerously high. Their books were a total disaster. That August, Huffy admitted their financial reports were full of some major accounting errors. Their shares tanked 40% in one day. By August 16th, the stock exchange killed their ticker and halted all trading. A brand that almost hit the Fortune 500 was suddenly facing a total collapse. On October 20th, 2004, Huffy, along with every one of its American and Canadian branches, sought Chapter 11 shelter through the federal bankruptcy court in Southern Ohio. They reported $139 million in assets versus $161 million in debt. Huffy was broke. The legal papers blamed a cash crunch bleeding money in Canada and failing to keep up with cheap foreign goods. They tried it all, cutting wages, closing shops, moving jobs overseas, and automating. It failed. The Chinese builders had simply beaten them. As the case unfolded, more dirt came out. They had mishandled the pension money. Shady bookkeeping masked their real status for a long time. Huffy's brass was essentially performing CPR on a corpse. Come July 2005, the brand finally hammered out a recovery roadmap. The deal wiped out old debts for fresh stock and bonds. Surprisingly, those holding the bill weren't American banks. Ownership shifted to China. An entity called the China Export and Credit Insurance Corporation, or Sinoshare, grabbed the reins. This state-run branch provided financial backing to Chinese shipping firms, which happened to be Huffy's main parts providers, per the court-approved deal. Sinwar took 30% of voting shares plus $3 million. Other lenders, mainly Chinese firms, got the remaining 70% and $9 million. They also held a 5-year window to buy their way into a 51% majority stake. The rebooted firm was valued at $64 million. Old shares were wiped out completely. No longer on the stock market, Huffy had effectively become a Chinese asset. Huffy cleared bankruptcy on September 23, 2005. The brand lived on, but the soul was different. No more local labor, no more domestic plants. U.S. control vanished, leaving only a logo and some delivery routes. They scrapped the original Huffy pension plan, too. The Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation stepped in to handle all future retiree payouts. 99% of retirees kept their full checks thanks to the PBGC's backing. Yet the brand washed its hands of the people who'd manufactured millions of bikes for half a century. Post-bankruptcy, the staff count sat at 140, a massive drop from the 1,000-plus workers they had 6 years prior. Nobody was building bikes there. All production had moved to foreign soil. The iconic brand that put three generations of American kids on wheels was now in the hands of its former rivals, Chapter 9, The Aftermath. That Celina plant is still there. Crown Equipment Corporation picked it up and converted it into a forklift factory. Crown leaned into the local talent that Huffy had cast aside. They offer solid work in Celina now, but those lines pumping out 1,500 bikes daily are long gone. Bicycles aren't part of the picture there today. Huffy lives on, though, headquartered out of Miami Township in Dayton, Ohio. Between 120 and 140 staff members manage design, marketing, and sales there. Actual production happens entirely abroad, mostly in factories across China and Taiwan. They move 5 million bikes annually through 10,000 American stores in 50 different countries globally. Major retailers like Walmart, Target, and Disney are their bread and butter. Ohio does the drawings, foreign shops do the rest. During 2018, Huffy rolled out Batch to target local bike shops instead of the usual massive retail chains. It was a move to distance themselves from the big box strategy that initially ruined the firm. Yet the basics haven't changed: high volume, low cost cycles. Huffy also added e-bikes and motorized toys for kids to the mix. They are currently testing out frames made from magnesium alloys. Pushing into European markets, they hope to outgrow their reputation as a budget department store brand. In January 2024, Huffy got back into BMX racing and freestyle. They put together a squad featuring Olympic athlete Nick Long, who is now running the program. Teaming up with Adrenaline Alley in Europe, Huffy claims they're all in on BMX, despite a history of starting and then quitting. During the 1980s, they funded Stu Thompson and started a racing crew. Then they vanished. By the late 90s, they produced serious gear like the Primus, only to quit again. They have returned, but everyone wonders for how long. Meanwhile, old school Huffy bikes are now prized collectibles. Three distinct hobbyist groups exist: those who hunt for Huffy models from the 1950s, folks hunting for mid-century cycles from the 60s versus those chasing down rides from the late 70s onward. The 1955 radio bike cost less than $100 back then, but mint examples fetch $1,500 to $2,000 today. Names like Thunder Road, Sigma Pro Lightning, and Dragster. These vintage frames serve as sentimental treasures. Former neighborhood kids are tracking them down once they hit adulthood. They are fixing them up, displaying them in garages, or showing them off on social feeds. Rides that felt totally uncool during the 80s have transformed into cherished icons of our early years. That 14-karat gold-plated 1 millionth Huffy from 1947 remains showcased at Dayton's Carillon Historical Park. Now a Smithsonian fixture, the 30 millionth unit represents a lost era of domestic manufacturing. These are genuine historic artifacts. Huffy continues production, though not on American soil anymore. The brand that pioneered training wheels for 50 million kids moved all manufacturing to China. Today, that Celina facility builds forklifts instead. The current output shares zero connection with cycling. Tell me something. Have you kept your very first set of wheels? Does it sit in some basement, a shed, or maybe your old man's garage? Was it a Dragster Sigma or Pro Lightning? Share your story below. Enjoyed this short doc. Give us a like and sub for more deep dives into major American brands that eventually faded away.